Hello Internet, and welcome to Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about encounter design. So we're going to do a few of these videos. I'm not exactly sure how many right now, but just about how to build dynamic encounters, and encounters that are going to be a little bit more than just, hey, there's these enemies, fight them until one side is out of HP. Before we get going, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit those buttons down there if you have not already. We really do appreciate it. It helps out the channel a whole lot. And speaking of the channel, we have a Discord server. So come on by, hang out. There's lots of off-topic discussions, but a lot of discussions as well where we're just helping people out with their games, things like that. So definitely come by, check it out, add to the community, join the collective. So what are we talking about today, and what are we not talking about today? So what we're not going to talk about today are things like alternative victory conditions and dramatic questions, which are a thing that I try to be pretty big on in my games. We will be talking about those in another video, and that's just basically all about setting up motivations for the party and for what they're fighting. This is less that. This is really more about random encounters than just encounters that you might already have planned as a GM. So the first and primary thing you should always try to do is get the most out of your monsters. This will include both using hazards and terrain that are specific or complementary to that creature, either things that it can use to its advantage or just to create an overall cohesive experience. Unless you have a good reason for it, you probably don't want a lot of ice creatures in the desert, and vice versa. But it goes a lot deeper than that. If you're having a lot of spooky type monsters, you probably want a spooky type setting. You want to be describing either, a grim graveyard or an old dungeon, ruined castle, things like that, versus if you're having a lot of plant-like monsters. It's really just about, again, cohesion and having these ideas that complement each other and make sense. Unless, of course, you're playing in a situation where something is out of place on purpose, and that's a whole different thing, and that's, definitely something that you should play with sometimes. But, again, we're just taking a more holistic view for most things. So, again, spooky places for spooky creatures, natural places for natural creatures and hazards. If you're in a city, you're more likely to encounter humanoids, for example, than rampaging, wild beasts. Although, again, you never know who could be smuggling something in, or what kind of zoo might be in town, whatever it may be. And don't be afraid to use hazards and terrain, weather effects, all sorts of things like that. For just as an example, if you're in a city setting and you've got, alleys and streets, but you've got a main thoroughfare, you've got buildings sort of rising up beside you, and there are archers all along those buildings, that's a very different encounter if the weather is clear versus if the weather is rainy. It could be a big advantage for your players if the archers have difficulty seeing. Or if it's just dark and your players don't have a lot of dark vision, although in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that's probably not the case. There's at least a lot of low light vision. But if you've got cover of darkness and the people shooting do not have do not have issues with darkness, all of a sudden that's a much more difficult fight. Same goes for if there's a lot of elevation and you're dealing with creatures that have climb speeds or flight, especially at lower levels. It can be very difficult for a party of below 3rd or 4th level characters to handle a lot of flying encounters, or just a lot of encounters with multiple levels, unless they've got a lot of ranged capabilities themselves, because at those levels they're just not going to have typically the alternative movement styles that might be necessary to get to those enemies. And that's something to consider too. Even if you've got characters who can act at range, you don't want to overdo those encounters where your martial characters who are frontline focused are completely unable to contribute. You do not want to have the situation where, you're asking everyone what they do and the barbarian says, I guess I spend my whole turn trying to climb again. That's not going to be fun. At least not all the time. Here and there it's fine, especially if, it's sort of a particular situation and you've warned them that it may be coming and they ignored those warnings and did not take the tools that they could have. So now let's talk about actually making those random encounters more interesting, or at least not so random. I'm not at all suggesting that you pretend to be rolling for random encounters or anything like that. And, maybe you're not using random encounters at all, but you do plan to have a lot of potential things that could happen based on party decisions. That's sort of how I run. I will have usually a couple of potentialities ready to go based on what I expect my party to do. And, sort of a branching sort of situation like that. And then, of course, having to react when they choose none of those options. But, so whatever your playstyle is, whether you're doing random encounters to get that feel, or you're, having branching paths that you've sort of planned out a step or two in advance, either way, you're going to have those situations where you may have multiple fights that aren't necessarily cohesive to the core of what's going on. They're not necessarily going to be these linear, go here, do this, go here, do this, fight the bad guy. So you're going to, of course, there are great lists in the bestiary about the types of creatures that might be standard to certain environments. But you can also use some of the tools from the Game Mastery Guide, and you can actually just apply traits and templates to creatures that may not normally have them. A great example of this is a troll. You can apply a fire trait to a troll, and now you've got a fire troll, and then if you need to, you can, add an elite template to it if you just want it to be a little bit tougher. But, creatures, especially like trolls that are sort of famous in lore for adapting to their surroundings and situations, are great candidates. But you can really do this with anything. The point is just that if, your party is at a certain level and they cannot fight something that's in the bestiary, you can either, if it's just a little bit of adjustment, you can apply the weak or the elite templates. But you don't really want to stack several of those. They can start to make the numbers pretty wonky, a little bit strange. So look for similar creatures at the right level that you can just sort of alter. Again, with those traits are a great way to do it. Or just with your descriptions. You don't even have to alter anything mechanically about a creature if you're just describing it a certain way. Although things like weaknesses and resistances might need a little bit to not ruin verisimilitude when you're fighting something that's icy and it seems to be resisting fire, things like that. Beyond that, you can use these random encounters to do a lot of good narrative work. They don't just have to be throwing some minis on the table or into the digital tabletop app that you're using, whatever. It's not just tokens. They don't have to just be straightforward fights. Now, what I mean by that is that you can get a lot of narrative out of the types of fights that you're having your players take on. You can set a tone about a new place early by having unique creatures, especially maybe one if it's a creature that you want to be more dangerous in a pack, for example. So you might have, let's say, for example, you've got a situation and you're in a border town and someone has caught an individual wolf, for example. You could show that wolf how dangerous it is, how the village reacts to it. Maybe that single wolf gets out, and it's a very small, simple combat to have them resolve that. Once you have done that, your players now know that there are wolves. That's one of the potential threats out in the wilderness. But they also, when they see more wolves later, in a larger setting, they would be like, okay, well, one wolf was, whatever. Now we've got a whole pack of them. They have an idea of how dangerous this creature is. They have an idea about its place and how it affects, by killing these wolves. Because we talked to the NPCs when we saw this one wolf, now we have context for what these wolves are, the types of problem these wolves are causing the village. You can also telegraph hazards. Again, back to that border town, maybe a snowstorm comes in, and again, the players get the information that this is not an uncommon occurrence this time of year. It's something they need to be prepared for and watch out for. And so now the next time they see that snowstorm, it's just reinforcing to them the type of location that they're in and the special things that they have to keep track of, the special challenges that they may have to endure. Bonus points if you can combine a telegraphed creature with a hazard that might give them an advantage, whether that is creatures that blend into their environment or creatures that, might be resistant to some of the hazards or weather that are coming about. And then the players then see how that creature reacts with its environment, how it uses that environment to hunt. For example, a creature that might never attack the players under ordinary circumstances, but because of the rainstorm, it gets a little more, we'll say, aggressive or a little more certain of its ability to separate the party and take them out. And this, it just stacks on top, and it makes the players now not only more wary of this creature, but more wary when this weather comes. They're going to be thinking about that creature again. You know, are there more of these out here? You know, if it keeps raining, are we just going to continue to get, you know, attacked randomly by these sorts of monsters? And then we can get less natural. You know, bandits are a classic random encounter thing. But they don't have to just be faceless brigands. What you can do with bandits, you can have them wearing insignia that can lead to a larger thing where you find out these are not just a separate group of bandits, but maybe they're part of some larger organized system. You know, classic organized crime angle. Maybe they can recognize one of the bandits. Maybe a mask comes down, or they recognize a voice with a good check, and now you realize, okay, these brigands are actually part of the town, and they're hitting, you know, travelers as they come in and out. Finally, maybe you notice that these brigands, someone realizes the weapons that they're carrying are identical to the weapons that the guard carries, and now you realize you've got a corrupt guard to deal with. So, you know, again, this standard trope of just attacked by bandits has now gained added context based on where they are and these little things that you've added. And it's set up potential hooks for your party to explore or ignore, as they may do. But it's making the world feel more lived in and like it's bigger than just what the PCs see right in front of them. On the subject of your humanoid creatures that they may fight, especially those that are intelligent and you know, have some manner of self-preservation, it's okay for them to flee or surrender. This can sometimes feel like a big no-no or a strange thing, you know, when you plan an encounter out and then all of a sudden, you know, it doesn't go that well in the first round or two. It's okay for these brigands, for example, to say, hey, you know, we're just trying to make some money. We were hoping you would just give it to us. We didn't really expect this fight to the death. Now my friend is laying here, possibly dead. I didn't sign up for this. You know, let's talk. Or just, you know, things escalate quicker than they expected, and they just run. Not all creatures will do this, of course. You know, really zealous adherents to, you know, cults or things like that may fight to the death just on principle, as well as anyone who's defending their home. You know, it may be pretty hard to run a farmer off from his homestead, you know, because he knows that without a way to feed it himself and his family, he's dead anyway, basically, so he might as well, you know, try to fight for what's his. So that's definitely a thing that you might see, and it's not, you know, insane for them to stay and fight, but you want to mix it up. You want to have some enemies that will flee, some that will surrender, and some that will fight tooth and nail to the bitter end. And those enemies that disengage and run away, players tend to hate that. So, you know, nobody really likes it when an NPC, an enemy gets away. So, you know, take advantage of that free enmity that you created, that little bit of dislike they have, and create a recurring villain. And now, you know, the next time they see that bandit with the scar on her face, they know, oh, that's the one that got away, and now she knows the party. Maybe she is part of something larger and is now directing her vengeance for her fallen comrades at you. Any number of things can happen from there. It's not always easy to control how your players are going to feel about an NPC. In fact, it's almost impossible sometimes. So take advantage of that when you see it. If you have created an enemy that, you know, they're a little bit sour that it got away, take advantage of that. Speaking of taking advantage, these humanoid typically, but you know, certainly in fantasy games, not necessarily humanoid, but these smarter enemies don't just have them waiting around to be murdered. You know, if the party has made themselves known in some way as potentially averse to a group's goals, then that goal may send people to attack the party. If the party has announced that they're going to go into the woods and fight the bandits that, you know, have been plaguing the town, well, maybe there's somebody in the town who knows the bandits, is loyal to the bandits, and will go forward secret ways and warn the bandits that the PCs are coming. And now, instead of meeting a bunch of lazy bandits that are feasting on stolen food and counting stolen gold. Maybe now they're coming into a defended, fortified camp. And that's a very different type of encounter. Don't be afraid to have intelligent enemies set traps or use the environment or hazards to their advantage, or just abandon camp if the party takes too long. That's not always satisfying for the party. It's, again, not the kind of thing you want to abuse. But if your party has taken too long to do something, a lot longer than you expected, they, sort of tarried around, did some side quests before they went to handle a problem, that problem may no longer be there and it's too late to correct it. And then there's repercussions. They say, okay, well, maybe next time we take a job, we should try to do that job instead of letting it sit. The other thing, and if you're using pre-built encounters, you will know this, but if you're not using pre-built adventures and things, not all random encounters need to be fights. Some of them can just be, hazardous elements and storms that you need to find shelter from. It can be people in need, people asking for favors. It could be traveling merchants. It could be any number of things. So don't just assume that just because you're going to roll to see what happens to the party, that it has to be an ambush by kobolds or whatever. Finally, and this is a big one and not always an easy one to do, but don't be afraid to include some fights that the party cannot win. There is a big caveat here. If you know your players, and hopefully you know your players better than I do, but if you know that your players are not the type to give up a fight, then you definitely need to be more careful. You need to either really hammer home what we're going to talk about here, or you need to just accept that this is probably not something that's going to work at your table. So, if your players are gung-ho, if they do not really take their characters' lives and deaths seriously, and that's totally fine. Some tables or just some players play that way. Not everyone wants to be fully immersed and take things that seriously and really get invested in that, and that's okay. I know that my players, through the years, I've had various types of groups that see it much more as a game versus others who are more into the narrative and are less likely to throw their characters' lives away. But, again, you'll know your table better than me, and this may not be something that's really feasible for you. But you can still potentially maybe sneak it in with some of these tips I'm going to share. So remember, these types of fights, they should not be added to a random encounter table or, to your GM's plans without some serious forethought and planning. The first thing you want to do is warn your players. It is not fun for anyone to think that they're playing a game that is going to work itself out around their level. Instead, and then they come upon an encounter that is clearly not meant for them to fight, but it's not so clear to them because of their assumptions. This is a big part of why the session 0 is so important. You can set these expectations early. You can say, so listen, my plan is not to kill the party, but the world is bigger than you, and sometimes you will encounter something that you may need to not fight. You may need to, run from. You may need to come back once you've gathered your resources, gained a few levels, and can handle it. And that's okay. It's great to set that up early on. The flip side is you may straight up tell your players, listen, I'm not going to put something in front of you that you cannot fight. If it's there, you will at least certainly have a chance to beat it. Neither of these are wrong, but they are important to establish up front. So let's say you are playing a game where you have established that, or you have changed your mind and you want to pivot. If you have changed your mind from something from session 0 like that, be sure to talk to your players beforehand. Let them know. It may be something that they protest, that they really do not enjoy the idea of having these things that they have to run from. So definitely, if you're changing something from your session 0, do not just change it without talking to people. Plans change, ideas change. If you're noticing your players are enjoying something else, it's always good to not think of session 0 as a one and done situation. It's something you should go back and talk to your players all the time. Just check in with them, say, hey, are we still getting what we want out of this campaign? Are we still seeing the types of things? I have this idea about where the campaign could go, and I want to talk to you and see if you all would be okay. A lot of times something that in your initial session 0 that you're talking about, if there's not a lot of trust, if it's a new group, it may be something that nobody wants to try or even suggest. But then as it goes, you might say, okay, I know that you said that you didn't want danger to your characters, but We're doing pretty well now. You guys seem pretty capable. What if I just put things out there that could kill you, but still will give you warning not to? That way, for various reasons, just to let you know the world is bigger, rather than just you all being able to assume that if I put something in front of you, you can kill it. So don't be afraid to have that talk. So again, let's assume that now we are at a table where potentially big scary bads are allowed. So you don't just want to bank on that unless it's something that you're using a lot. You don't want to just bank on your players remembering that sometimes they need to run. If you're going to put something in front of them that they cannot handle, you want them to know about it. You don't want to just tell them. You don't want to say, hey, guys, about an hour into this session, you should run. No, you want to have a lot of NPCs telling players, oh, have you heard about, Terror Tooth, whatever lives out in the woods. If you see the red rocks out in the valley, you should know he's around, right? Things like that. So lots of warning. Let them see the aftermath of that sort of thing, so that it's not just NPCs telling them, but it's things that they've seen. A great reference for this is the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. Gets telegraphed a lot. Doesn't really necessarily pay off. Not that the ending with the raptors isn't satisfying, but there's a lot of this T-Rex is too much, and then thankfully there's no final confrontation where the T-Rex has to die in that movie, which is fine. I think everybody likes the T-Rex. Nobody wants to see it die, but the tools that they use there to telegraph how powerful that T-Rex is, how big of a threat. I mean, we see it destroy a car, and they just have to run. But what I'm talking about specifically here that you might use is have a random encounter that is the PCs either interacting with something that they're familiar with, so they have a gauge for how powerful it is, or just seeing something that they're familiar with, again, so that they can gauge how powerful it is. And then, like that scene with the Gallimimuses and the T-Rex that comes out of the woods and just, tears into one, you can have your players, maybe they think that what they're going to watch, or what their random encounter is getting past this small encampment of enemies, and then what they see is the bigger fish come in and decimate easily something that they were planning on. How are we going to deal with this? This could be pretty tough. And then it just comes in and wrecks that whole situation. That's going to tell your players, because they know relatively how they might fare against this creature that they've either faced previously, or in some way encountered and are familiar with its power. And then seeing something come in and just sweep it, hopefully your players are going to say, oh, we do not want to mess with that, at least not yet. The other thing, when you're using a creature that is more powerful, not something you intended for them to be able to defeat, or at least that you expect them to try, is give them plenty of ways to escape. A lot of times, if your players have an idea for how to escape and their first idea does not work, they may begin to think that they're in a situation where you don't want them to run. And that's going to cause them to think, oh, okay, well, they wouldn't have my GM wouldn't have put me in this situation if I couldn't win. They would have let me leave just now when I tried to, do whatever my idea was. And since they're not going to let me leave, they must want me to fight this. That's certainly not necessarily the case, but it is the type of logic that a player may run through in their mind when they're encountering a situation and they're asking questions and they're trying to do things. If you're shutting down escape, they're not going to try more than one or two escapes before they start thinking that this is just a fight they've got to fight. So, do not... it can be very tempting when you've got a big scary monster to not allow them all to just teleport away, things like that. But I do not recommend that you do that. I recommend that at the very least have a couple of different ways that they can leave that fight once they realize they do not want to take part in it. Part of that is going to be making sure that that creature has alternative goals, and that's something that, again, we'll talk about in another video. But just making sure that that creature, if that creature's sole goal is to chase down and kill the party, it's probably going to chase down and kill the party regardless of what you do. So, if you're playing that right, so that can make escape seem like not the right choice again. If the party says, okay, let's take off running, and then this creature is keeping up with them and, bringing the fight to them, as it were. Again, they may think, well, we can't run, we've got to turn and fight, and again, against a creature that you hadn't anticipated them doing that, they may wipe. So just alternative motivations for the creature, or just an idea for the creature to, worst case scenario, take one of your players, focus on them, end them, and then be satisfied with that. This is not ideal. You don't want to plan to kill a player, but as long as it's something that your players have talked about and said that they're okay with, it can be a great tool to both put the fear of this creature in them, let them realize that stakes are real, and provide some good narrative motivation for them to come back and get revenge. The other thing is to make sure that the party knows that they do not have to fight this creature, that there is some alternative. It is not their goal to slay the dragon, unless you want it to be to slay the dragon. So if they show up to a place and their goal is, we've got to rescue the king, he's been kidnapped by a dragon, who knows why, that's a very different thing than we've got to go slay the dragon. So if they get there and they realize they cannot defeat the dragon, then you can hammer home, remember, you don't have to kill the dragon. You just have to get the king back to his people so that he can rule, whatever, the motivation is there. That's what you've been hired to do. Not kill the dragon, but to save the king. However you save the king will be fine. So that can turn it into a different thing besides just, we've got to kill this dragon. Hopefully they'll start thinking outside the box for ways to not engage the dragon that they just saw kill 30 soldiers, whatever it may be. However you told them that this dragon might be too much for them. So why do this at all? Why have a creature that the players cannot defeat? Again, it's about building narrative with the tools that you have, and about showing, not telling, and expanding on that world. So the first big benefit is you're just going to make the world feel bigger. You're going to make it feel like, although everyone knows this isn't really the case, you're going to feel like it doesn't just exist there for the players to interact with. Of course, it actually does, but there's no reason to make that clear. Just like most TV shows are, of course, TV shows, but they don't go out of their way to tell the viewers this is just a TV show. So, it's that sort of thing. You want to give your players reason to think that things exist beyond what they have the capability of seeing or interacting with at this moment. The other thing, you could just be telegraphing an enemy for your players to face later. Something that they need to level up, grow into, and come back to face. So that dragon could become a threat again later. You've rescued the king, he's back with his people, he's able to shore up his defenses, hire some dragon slayers, the dragon decides to, kick rocks, head down the line, and try another kingdom. And then maybe later the players are at this other kingdom and this dragon shows up again, but now the players are strong enough to actually fight it. Having things like that are going to make your players, A, feel like they've grown and gotten more powerful, and also just feel really satisfying knowing that something they had to run from, they can now defeat. Finally, you can actually use these to train the party to run. If you, have a party who understands that there may be things they can't fight, but at the same time, you've seen them not always take those cues. By telegraphing a situation that they cannot win, by giving them all these warnings, giving them all these ways to not actually have to engage with that fight, doing all of these things, you can set them up to know that for this fight, the right thing to do is run. And once they've got that idea in their heads, they're going to be more likely to run in instances where an accidental problem is arriving. Not all, big unbeatable fights are planned as big unbeatable fights. Sometimes the dice are just not working out in the party's favor, or sometimes the party has underestimated or has not taken, whatever proper precautions. Any number of things can happen between round 1 and round 3 that can change the course of how that fight goes. That's the fun of the game. But by having been trained from telegraphed, this is too big for use, they're going to be more likely to recognize and be okay with running from the surprises. So those times when you did not mean to create a party-killing encounter, and you realize you have on accident, your players are now more likely to run because it's established that it's A, okay to do that, that B, they can still get a satisfactory resolution if they do that, and that they can trust you as a GM to tell a good story and take care of that. So that's just sort of part one on encounters. If there's something that you want us to go a little more in depth on, again, things like the dramatic question and the alternative win conditions, that's something that I'm planning for another video. So I don't want to do much more than just touch on those in the comments below. But if you do have a particular question about this, by all means, let me know. And if you have any other tips for people on how you like to build encounters, things that you like to do that you found work really well, definitely let us know in the comments as well. So thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Welcome to Collective. Be sure to check out that Discord, and we'll see you next time.